Good afternoon, everyone. I just wanted to start off today's video by showing you a picture or a video of my dog. Bubba, you sleepy? Bubba. Apparently he's very sleepy, if you can't see. He's very sleepy. Bubba. So he's about 120 pounds. He's a chocolate lab, even though he looks black lab. He's a chocolate lab. All right, today I'm going to talk about land, public, and private. I'm going to try to make this pretty quick. I've set the timer to stop me at 20 minutes. Okay, so some of you did your project on this about public and private land, about agricultural land, and other things. So the United Nations has created these 6 different categories for protected lands. So every country around the world has some sort of protected land, and sometimes it may even be like ocean. The only national park in the United States that is completely aquatic is known as Biscayne National Park. It's off the coast of Florida. Usually protecting lands is a good thing, but sometimes if you, let's say that you live in an area that the government wants to protect, they will sometimes kick you out. And this is true for indigenous people. For example, in the Mau Forest in the Rift Valley in Kenya, 20,000 families have been displaced, which is really sad to think about. This is a map showing you all of the different national parks or protected areas from around the world. So if you notice, there are some where off the coast of certain countries, those are protected areas and other stuff like that. All right, so let's talk about public land in the United States. So 42% of land is publicly held. And when I say publicly held, I mean it is owned by the government. So there are a couple of different designations, and I'm going to go through each one of these here in a little bit. The first one are rangelands, which are grazing areas, national forests, national parks, national wildlife refuges, and wilderness areas. So each one of these has a different function. Wilderness areas, when we talked about certain areas that you don't touch, you leave them alone, kind of the preservation viewpoint, that's what a wilderness area is. A national wildlife refuge, I know we talked about ANWR, the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. So all lands in the United States are managed by basically 4 different organizations, if you will. So the first one is the BLM. It is the Bureau of Land Management. The next one is the Forest Service. There's the National Park Service. And then there's the Fish and Wildlife Service. So a lot of you probably are wondering, where is all of this land that is being protected or that's being publicly owned by the government? So most of it is out west here. So if you look down here, this shows you all the different organizations that are owning the land. Most of it is out west. Okay, so there's going to be a question on a Google form later that says, where's most of the land that is publicly owned? It's actually out west, and a lot of it is also in Alaska. All right, so let's talk about land usage in these federal agencies. So this pie chart over here is showing you the various different uses for public lands in the United States, and the very top one is grassland, pasture, and rangeland, followed shortly by 1% by forest use land. So in the United States, most publicly owned lands are what they will call multiple use. And multiple use just means that they can be used for more than one thing. So for the Bureau of Land Management, it's used for grazing, mining, timber, harvesting, and recreation. The one thing that all of these have in common is recreation. So for all of these, you can use these lands for recreation. So this is the United States Forest Service, this is the National Park System, and this is the Fish and Wildlife Service. Urban land only accounts for about 2% in the United States, which is really interesting if you think about it. All right, so let's talk about the number 1 use of land in the United States, which is this grassland, pasture, and rangeland. So what is a rangeland? It's basically grazing area for different, cattle, different animals. Here's some pros. So let's say that you are a farmer and you need somewhere for your cattle to graze. You can graze them on public lands based on this Taylor Grazing Act of 1934. Before this, people would just overgraze for forever. But now with this Taylor Grazing Act, it's kind of, preventing the tragedy of the commons. So here's some pros to rangelands. Grazing decreases the CAFOs, the concentrated animal feeding operations that I talked to you in the last PowerPoint about. It fertilizes the soil, so as the animals poop, they drop some manure, it fertilizes the soil, and them stepping on the soil actually aerates the soil, which is good. And they can also, you can take some cattle or something and put them on a different tract of land, and you can get them to eat up all the invasive species. One of the best ways to get rid of kudzu is get a goat. So you get a goat, the goat just eats all of the kudzu, and they love eating it. Here's some cons. Overgrazing. Too many at one time, one place, one time. That's going to cause you to have some issues with things like erosion, desertification, and things like that. Tragedy of the commons, since it's publicly owned, no one's really, protecting it. And again, I've already mentioned this one, just wind erosion, possible desertification. And desertification is just where an area becomes increasingly arid or increasingly dry. Usually it's due to human activities. It's natural, but it can be accelerated by human activities. So this Taylor Grazing Act, like I said, it allowed for the creation of a permit system. So anytime you have a tragedy of the commons, what you probably want to do is establish some sort of private property rights and establish some sort of permit system. It limited the number of animals in a particular area. The permits were extremely cheap though, so people just bought a ton of them and then they overgrazed the land anyways. This is showing you, this side here is where they were overgrazing. This is where they were not overgrazing. So there's a stark difference between the two. And again, this picture is showing you the exact same thing. And overgrazing is very common even in other developed countries. In less developed countries, it's very common. So again, these grasslands, pastures, and rangeland, they're the #1 use of public land in the United States. And they're where cattle graze and other things like that. Forest, so there are a lot of different types of forest. There's the tropical rainforest, there's the temperate forest, there's the taiga, there's all kinds of different types of forests. So just for a general definition, forests are dominated by trees and other woody vegetation. So shrubs included in that. So 75% of forests in the United States are actually privately owned, meaning that they have their own land. They have things like tree plantations. And a tree plantation is where you have tons of the same species of tree, and then you cut down all of them at once, or you cut down a little bit of them at once, and then you log them and you make them for some product. National forests in the United States were created originally actually to be used for timber. So people would go on there, they would log the trees, or they would cut them down, and then they would sell them for a profit, maybe for some paper, or maybe for some toilet paper that people are so crazy about right now. So the government would allow that as long as they gave them a royalty, and a royalty is just a percentage of the profit. So let's say that I sold it for, $1, you get 10 cents of the dollar and I make 90 cents. But the royalties in this are really, really small, meaning that, like I gave in the example, maybe you get 90 cents and the government only gets about 10%. But the government doesn't really do a lot with this money. They just keep up the roads and things like that. So I put this picture on here to show you the different national forests in South Carolina. So if you're interested, there's the Sumter National Forest, there's the Francis Marion National Forest. You've probably been to a couple of these before. So there are a couple of different types of forests that they like to talk about on the AP exam. One of the most popular ones is an old growth forest. So an old growth forest is a forest that's been around for forever and it's relatively untouched by humans. One of the main issues with this is that you have to leave large tracts of this forest untouched. And people have a really hard time with doing that. That's why there's relatively few of them left. The old growth forests, they have a couple of benefits. There are a lot of species that really enjoy being uninterrupted. One example in South Carolina is this thing called the red cockaded woodpecker, or the RCW, as people call it. It loves the old growth forest, but there aren't that many old growth forests left, especially in the upstate. Most of them are downstate. They're a carbon sink. They can suck all kinds of carbon dioxide out of the air. They have healthy soils, and a lot of times they're trees with high economic value. So I put this over here, this fun little meme over here. Mahogany is one that is found in an old-growth forest. This is that woman from the Hunger Games. That is mahogany. No, this is Patrick. Is this a Krusty Krab? No, this is Patrick. So let's talk about how you can manage a forest. So how do you know when you should cut down a tree? So you've got this giant tract of land and you don't know, should I cut it down now? Should I wait? There's this concept called maximum sustainable yield, and a lot of times it's going to be a parabolic curve if you're talking about trees. And what this maximum sustainable yield means is it just means that the amount of natural resource that you harvest does not compromise the future availability. So if you want to talk about the amount that is, the best, usually you want to try to hit it right here in this center curve. So as it's growing at its maximum rate of increase, you then cut down the trees and then they will grow back at a relatively rapid rate. So a lot of people have asked me what tree species are harvested the most. Mostly they are oak, pine. Some of them can be, really expensive ones like mahogany. And how do they harvest these trees? So there are three different ways. There's clear cutting, where you just take out all the trees. So all the trees are a certain age, you just take out all of them. There's selective cutting, where you remove a single tree or a couple of trees in a relatively, dense patch. And then there's this other one that's called ecologically sustainable. This is one that everyone's trying to move towards because they want to have different species and a great biodiversity in a forest. So let's talk about pros and cons of clear cutting. So clear cutting, again, is where you just cut down, you go in and you just take out all the trees. Most of the time you're going to sell these or you're going to sell them to like a paper company or some other company. So pros, cheapest method of harvesting trees. You just go in there, you cut them all down. It is ideal for trees that like full sunlight or direct sunlight. So if you are a tree that grows well in the shade and not in direct sunlight, you're going to be out of luck here. And all of the trees are the same age, so they all mature at the same time, and then you can reseed at the same time. But here are the cons to this. What happens is whenever you cut down all the trees, you're going to increase things like wind and water erosion of the topsoil. If it's on a slope, it's going to be more prone to things like mudslides. So the trees at one point, they were anchoring in all that soil into place, but now that the trees are gone, water events, rain events, flooding that comes down through there, it's just going to take away a lot of the topsoil with it, so a lot of erosion. It actually increases the amount of sunlight that reaches a river or a stream, and since it does that, the water actually heats up, and the water also becomes more turbid. And when I say turbid, I mean that the water is actually getting cloudier because there's a lot of sediment coming in, and fish actually can't find prey as easy. So those are the pros and cons of clear cutting. So here's a picture of clear cutting. Again, you just have all these trees, you take them all out. This one is showing like Christmas trees, like Fraser firs or Douglas firs. Excuse me. So here are the pros and cons of selective cutting. So selective cutting, you go in and you only cut down a couple of them. Maybe you're gonna, sell just a few. So it creates small openings for shade-tolerant trees. So in here, if you've got a tree that needs, shade to grow instead of being in direct sunlight, then you can do that. You can have trees in here that grow in the shade. It also produces more wildlife habitat. So if you have different species of trees, you have different species that like different species of trees, and then you'll have more biodiversity or more wildlife habitat. It reduces fire hazards because it's getting rid of those underbrush, and it also decreases the soil erosion because you're not clear cutting the entire area. You're leaving some trees to hold on to that soil so it doesn't go into a river. Time consuming. You have to actually come up with a plan, like a forest management plan to determine what trees to cut and which ones you don't. It also has a lot of debris that you have to hire people to move or you have to move it yourself, so it's going to be expensive. All right, so this is a picture of not clear cutting. This is going to be selective cutting. You just go in and cut down a couple at a time. All right, so we've talked about forest fires. Oh, that sounded terrible. Forest fires and forest health. So fires are a natural part of an ecosystem, and usually it happens whenever lightning strikes a tree, and then it just starts, going up in a blaze. Now, fires have been suppressed throughout most of the United States, and this is a problem because the forest fires are becoming more and more intense and they're occurring more often. Think about the wildfires in California. Since fire is being suppressed, there's a buildup of this underbrush, and again, one way that we can get rid of this is using this prescribed fire, where you go in and you have people with flamethrowers or torches, and they burn a small portion, and then they burn up the underbrush. Forest fires are also releasing a ton of carbon dioxide, particulates, ash, and all kinds of stuff like that. So let's talk about deforestation around the world. Deforestation is not really a problem in America, but it is a problem in a lot of developing countries where farmers need more farmland. So for example, the Amazon rainforest, people are cutting down a large portion of it because they need the farmland. And they do this thing called slash and burn. Slash and burn is where they cut down all the trees, they set it on fire, and then as it burns, it releases the nutrients back into the soil. And they think that each year the world loses about 6.7 million hectares of forest due to agriculture, urban sprawl, and then other human impacts. Because to build houses for people and to build roads, you're going to have to, cut down trees and cut down these old growth forests. All right, so here's some environmental impacts of deforestation. So since there is less photosynthesis, there's going to be more global climate change. Remember, those trees are sucking in a ton of carbon dioxide out of the air, and carbon dioxide is a greenhouse gas. The more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, an accelerated, greenhouse effect is going to lead to global climate change. Soil erosion is going to lead to desertification. Remember, desertification is the process by which an area becomes extremely arid. Usually it's due to the fact that humans are intervening somehow, but it is a natural process. Habitat loss, you're going to lose a lot of species, or you're going to have a lot of species declining in an area because they no longer have habitat. You cut down their habitat. And again, erosion, this last one, less cover crops, increased flooding, that's going to go back to the whole soil erosion. All right, so these are just some, if you want to go through here and look at these, they're just kind of some graphics. This is an economic impact of deforestation, and it's got a video here that you can watch. And here's the last thing. What can I do? How can I help? So logging is harming the planet by cutting down some trees, and, deforestation is a really big issue. What can you do to help? The first thing you can do is you can use recycled wood or paper products. So about 12 million tons of wood goes into a landfill every year. And again, remember, if you have it in a landfill, it's just sitting there. It's not really decaying or being broken down. You can donate to some sort of organization like the World Wildlife Fund or another organization that is leading to the sustainable harvesting of trees. You can also donate your money or your time to a community that needs help planting trees. You can also try planting some trees at where you live. You can take action yourself. You can become a citizen scientist. And again, you can also raise awareness. You can say, hey, have you heard about the deforestation in the Amazon rainforest? Or you can try to bring it to people's attention and other things like that. There is a kind of a program in the United States that encourages the use of recycled paper, or it encourages companies to make recycled paper. So if you have any questions about that, I have kept it underneath 20 minutes, although I feel like this one is less in quality than the other ones because my brain is going at a rapid speed. So if you have any questions, please leave me a comment or email me or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Have a great day.